Ariel Helwani. That's the nothing personal word of the day. It is a Samson sit down with someone who I've been trying to get to come on this show since the early days of the craziness in Montreal and Levitard. You know him from MMA. You know him from having one of the most successful podcasts around, from being one of the best analysts in a sport that is growing faster than my sport by far. I'm proud to introduce Ariel Helwani. Come on. Hey, how are you?
Hello, David. It's nice to talk to you again. For the record, you reached out to me, I think, a couple of days ago for the first time to come on, and I said yes right away. So I don't know where these other requests have gone, perhaps to Jerry, but not to me. I
Oh, I
jumped
think it
in right
was
away.
just I think it was through Meadowlark Bookers who said, "I
You
can't
can't
even
trust
reach
the
that
bookers.
guy."
You can't trust the bookers. You have to go. This is why, by the way, on my program, thank you for the kind words. Since 2009, we have done shows from then until now. The only person to ever book a guest on the show, and we average around 10 a week, is myself because I feel like you gotta send the text, and people are less inclined to say no if it's coming directly from you.
So you changed your number. I had your number and I texted it and it went green and I was extremely suspicious in this day and age when green happens. So I texted our mutual friend and he must have asked you permission because I got the real number and you answered in a jiffy.
Yes, that is true. I did have to change my number, if only because an MMA fighter was trying to have a go at me, as they say over in the UK. He's a British fighter, and he posted my phone number on Twitter, and it was a
Why was
disaster.
he having a go at you?
Well, maybe we were going a little back and forth. As you know, I'm not one to back down, and his retaliation, which I thought was a low blow, which he has since apologized profusely for, was to post my phone number on Twitter, which was an awful, awful, awful experience. I actually happened to be in Montreal at the time at my parents' house, and all of a sudden I'm getting calls from, honestly, the entire world, from China to Abu Dhabi to Australia. And I thought maybe I could ride the wave and it would just die down for, a few hours later. And it just never stopped. So I had to succumb and change the number. So yes, there's been a lot of situations like this where someone's like, "Hey, did you get a Samsung? Or are you not replying?" Or I just, it's MMA, crazy
I'm
characters.
trying to think of the nightmare moment when you realize you have no choice but to change your number. You've gone right to the edge.
It was a nightmare moment. I called my brother, who I usually call in these situations, and we both just had to come to the conclusion that it was time to change the number that I've had for over 20 years. Awful, because you don't realize how much is tied to your phone number. Like little things, kids' school, contact info, dentist, all that stuff. It's just, uh, I swore I'd never talk to the guy again, and we were actually quite close. And I think he might have been under the influence when he did it. But I also believe in, we only live one life, and it's important not to hold grudges. Hence why I'm talking to you right now, and we're pals. Because trust me, uh, Ariel of a few years ago is saying no and laughing about it to this request.
Well, I'm loving that you didn't. I'm not ready to let go of the phone number because I'm just curious. Do you keep a list of calls you have to make to change your number, or are you waiting to have it catch up to you? Oh, you didn't reach me. I have a new number. How does that work exactly?
So what I did when I changed the number was, I went through maybe like 8 months of texts, and I just put to every person, "Hi, this is Ariel. I have a new number." And so I figured, if I haven't talked to you in 8 months, you're not like a major player at the moment. But as you know, in my business, I'm doing, media. I'm trying to get scoops. I'm trying to do this, trying to book interviews. You're constantly in contact with a gazillion different people on WhatsApp, on text. I'm so crazy about booking and about just the whole art of interviewing and my show and the relationships, that sometimes I play a game with the guys on my show, and they'll say a fighter's name, and I'll tell you the best way to get in contact with them off the top of my head. So, oh, he's a WhatsApp guy, he's a Samsung guy, he's a guy that you need to go through his wife, he's a guy that you need to go through his manager. And so I'm so meticulous when it comes to this stuff. I knew right away who I'd been in contact with, but here we are 2 years later, and I still every week get a, "Hey, did you change your number?" Or, "Hey, why don't you write me back?" Thank
So
God
I'm
we have
still
social
new
media,
at
by the
this.
way, so people could DM you and be like, "Yo, what's up?"
I'm still new at this. I was thinking you started in '09. What has been the biggest change? I've been doing this since 19. and I've been thinking what it has changed since '09, and I don't even know where to start from a podcast standpoint and from a show standpoint. What do you think has changed the most?
A lot has changed, and I'd even take it back further. It really started for me in '01. '01, I get to Syracuse University, and I want to be the next Bob Costas. I want to be the next Marv Albert. I want to be the next Mike Tirico. Those are guys who, went to Newhouse, went to Syracuse, and they were inspirations for me and to me. And I leave Montreal to go to this school, and in Montreal, no one wants to do, like, all my friends. I grew up in the Jewish community. They all want to be lawyers, doctors, accountants, following the family business, etc. I go to Syracuse, and now for the first time in my life, I'm surrounded by kids who all have the same dream as me. And so this is '01. The UFC isn't even 8 years old at the time. And I remember telling my parents, an immigrant from Egypt, an immigrant from Lebanon, hey, there's this thing called mixed martial arts. There's this league called the UFC. There's no guy covering it. As I'm a huge fan of it, and I can't find good coverage of it. I want to be the Howard Cosell of this thing. Everyone wants to be the stick and ball guy. Let me go down this path. And they said, great, go for it. And so I actually started my radio show at Syracuse in '01. And it's really very similar to the show that I do now. And back then, what I would do is I would go on fighter websites. I would say, okay, I want Ken Shamrock on the show. And I would find, each guy had his own website, and I would send them an email, and some of them would reply and some of them wouldn't. Bruce Buffer was on, all kinds of guys. And then that evolved into MySpace. MySpace was the way I would send out a bunch of messages every day. Some people would respond. And now, obviously, over time, you become a lot more, known, and people respond to you, and you get the manager's number and all that stuff. So even from a booking standpoint, it has dramatically changed. And then from a just distribution standpoint, when I started, YouTube wasn't really a thing. We were using all kinds of different players like Bright Cove and all this other stuff. And then, now everyone's on YouTube. There was actually a point where I was kind of embarrassed to say I was on YouTube because it felt like rinky dink. And now everyone wants to be on YouTube first. So yeah, so much has changed. And that show, the show that I'm doing now, has gone from AOL to Vox Media to ESPN to back to Vox Media. And it continues to evolve. And now I'm not just doing MMA, I'm doing all kinds of combat sports. I'm venturing into other sports. So yeah, a lot has definitely changed.
I feel like I was ahead of the curve back in '00 and '01 when we did English radio in Montreal only via the internet. And the Hall of Famer Dave Van Horn had to walk around to every road trip with his briefcase in order to
I
connect. And there
remember
was
that.
no other team doing it. And now, of course, that's all it is.
I
Only
remember.
one of the many things that I think you were angry about as it relates
Yes,
to
yes,
baseball in Montreal.
and of course, my first interaction with your family was opening day against the New York Mets. I do believe in 2000, when I saw Mr. Loria in the concourse next to the boutique. You know what I'm talking about, when you walk up the P-Nev subway station. You know what I'm talking about?
Of course.
The Jackie Robinson statue is right over here. There's the boutique. There's the will call over there, and then you can
What was
walk
he
through.
doing there? Was he
Who-
greeting people?
He was out there shaking hands, and
His only time doing that.
1000%. And this was the why not us, why not now era.
Love that. In all the different languages, Japanese for Hideki Arabu.
Exactly. And I walked up to him and I hugged him and I said, thank you for saving our team. And then I said, why did you pay Graham Lloyd so much money? But no, it was all positive. And I remember when I was at Syracuse, so I went '01, '02, and then I think you guys sold it in '02, if my memory serves me correct, right?
We started in Miami in '02, so we were in Montreal in '00 and '01, 2
Right. So
seasons.
already the streaming stuff started a little bit. And at that point, I was actually kind of thrilled that there was some sort of streaming capability in place, because that was the only way that I can follow the team. I would go to the library at the on campus, and I would plug in my headphones and listen to, TSN 690 to listen to the Expos games. That's how diehard I was, David. That's how much I love this team.
I love that. What is shocking is when we had to tell the commissioner what we were doing, and we went through that, we still were on French radio, and that was the majority of the market, but we couldn't get money for English radio. And this is when teams like the Red Sox were getting millions and millions of dollars for radio. Now, of course, we're only 2 decades later, and teams, there's really no radio rights anymore. You get inventory and you can sell the ads if you want. And we just didn't want to be in the business of not getting rights fees because baseball didn't want us to be the first team to agree to not do rights fees. And so that's when we decided we had to do it in English for the population of Montreal. We had to go web-based.
Why did baseball? Why didn't they want you guys to be first?
Because they did not believe that we should. It's like with stadium financing. You're not allowed to do a bad deal because the other owners won't let you because they
Ah,
don't want to be forced to do a bad deal. And that's the same with TV and rights deals and radio and rights deals. Everything, there's a department of baseball that has to approve all that. And things get slotted in according to market size. And we were not able to fit into our slot because we couldn't get a deal. And baseball wasn't focused on the English v. French. So they were comparing our English radio deal to other teams' English radio deal.
hmm.
And that other teams, obviously, English is their primary radio
Right,
deal.
right,
And
right,
for
right.
us, the French deal, which was at the time a 7-figure deal
Wow.
in French radio in Montreal, but English ended up being a 0. And we didn't lose much, maybe 100 grand doing all the games on English radio, but it was depressing because other teams made more money.
By the way, I was curious, and we don't have to rehash all of this, of course, but when's the last time you were in Montreal?
I've been several times.
Oh, really?
Yes, I love Montreal. Absolutely love it. I went obviously when I was still in baseball, when the Expos were still there. And since then, I've probably had 4 guys' weekends and 1 couples weekend
Okay.
in
And does
Montreal.
anyone ever recognize you?
So, yes. And in the beginning, when I was still in baseball, it was mixed. I would say generously, though generally people are not as courageous in front of you as they
Of
are
course.
behind you. But now, when I go back, the last time I was there, I was in a restaurant and someone was talking to me about the Expos and someone mentioned the name David Samson. And I had to say, oh, that's me.
Ah,
And that's when I realized that enough time had passed that I think that people had begun to sort of move on from the face, if not the name.
it's amazing because there's definitely, I mean, it's been 20 years, right, since their final season. October will be the 20th anniversary of their last game. I'm sure you're familiar with Jack Todd, the columnist from the
I'm
Montreal
still a
Gazette.
0 to that
You're
guy.
still a
How
zero.
does that happen? How do
I
you
was
get
just
into the Hall of Fame of zeros in
for
this world?
this every Monday, my dad would leave out the sports section for me, the Montreal Gazette, and I would look forward to the Monday morning quarterback column that Jack Todd, the famous Montreal columnist, would pen. And it was always at the very end, heroes and zeros. And the heroes and zeros were always based on people that have done stuff over the past 7 days since the last column. But without fail, till this day, and I think he's just a contributor now. Anytime he does it, it's heroes, zeros, and the last 2 are you and David
N
Loria. Excuse
no,
me,
no.
Jeffrey Loria.
The last 3,
Oh,
it's Claude Brochu,
that's right.
Jeffrey Luria, and David Sampson.
How do you
It's
feel about that?
I think it's funny that he's angry at both the buy side and the sell side.
Yeah, that's true.
Those are the only 2 sides in a transaction, and I would like him to have an area in the permanent heroes for someone who didn't do the deal or someone who could have done the deal. I just feel
Sure.
like there's room for improvement there, which reminds me, thinking about Montreal baseball, did you fall for the Tampa Montreal split season scenario?
Not for a second. I thought it was ridiculous. I thought we were being used as some sort of negotiation ploy. I would have people in Montreal text me like, "This is real. This is really going to happen." First of all, why would the Players Association agree to this?
Never.
Who would ever want this? Which player would sign up to live in Canada and the U.S., Florida and Montreal? They couldn't be further apart. They couldn't be more different. Then you have the issue of AL. Like, are they going to be an AL team? Okay, that could be fixed. But to me, it just felt like Sternberg and company were using us as some sort of leverage ploy. There was a period where I spoke to a very, very, very respected journalist in Canada, and he told me that he thought the whole like Stephen Brompton thing was real and that this was going to happen. And then they pulled out, and now it's pretty much never talked about. You just shook your head. It sounds to me like you never believed it.
No, and I talked about it Nothing Personal a lot for very many of the reasons you just outlined. Number 1, the union would not give permission to it. Number 2, I couldn't find a way to get one stadium built
Yeah,
in Miami. It took forever, and I couldn't get it done in Montreal, and they can't get it done in Tampa, though they claim they're doing it now. But the plan was 2 new stadia, and it was all gonna be great. No roof needed because you'd be in Florida when the weather's good, you'd be in Montreal when the weather's good, and they'd have 2 different sales forces, and the baseball operations department would go back and forth. I just knew it wouldn't happen, but Stu Sternberg and Steven Bronfman, remember when they went to the World Series
Oh
and they
yeah.
were photographed together to make the lie even more real?
Do you think Bronfman thought there was a chance, or do you think he was just happy to be a part of it?
So I've known Steven. I met, Steven is, of course, Charles's son.
Of course, yeah.
Charles, the former owner of the Expos. Charles, who was best friends with Commissioner Bud Selig, which made that whole lawsuit against Bud very, very personal. And I believe it cost Charles and Bud their friendship for quite a long time
Wow.
when the lawsuit was filed by Stephen Bronfman against Bud and me and Jeffrey and the president of baseball, Bob Dupay. And Stephen Bronfman, when he became an owner of the Expos, I will never forget this. And he and I have talked about it before, so he owns up to it. We asked him about being in charge because Bud Selig was absolutely hoping that a local Montrealer would buy the team from Claude Brochu, just the little GP piece, and run it. And Steven said, I like my life too much. I don't want to be involved at that level. And granted, that was 20 years ago, but generally, I find that people like children don't change all that much. And so I'm not sure that he ever wants to be the face of a franchise or in charge. And he's back in the news recently about expansion into Montreal,
I
believing
just
that there's a chance.
Do you think there's a chance?
I don't, but I do believe that they're going to be used in order
Exactly.
to get a higher expansion fee. I think the issue in Montreal, and it's not about the city, it's not about the size of the city. There's a real problem when it comes to public financing, and much more so in Montreal because they just gave a ton of money to redo Olympic Stadium. Did you read about that deal?
It makes me sick to my stomach.
What is how do you decide? And it's not even for a professional sports team. And they acknowledged it. It's for all like the raves where we would find Molly rappers when we were
Uh,
with the Expos after these raves they would have
or like boat shows and things
all
like
of
that.
that stuff.
Like no one's going there. And I went to a couple of those Blue Jay games that they had there, the exhibition games, spring training, whatever you want to call them. First of all, the first time I went to one, it was maybe 14 or 15. It felt like I was being reacquainted with someone who I thought was dead. Like it smelt the same, and I never thought it was really an out of body experience because I took my son who was not born in '04. He was 2 years old, 3 years old at the time. I never thought that I would see baseball in that stadium. It's a very unique setting for baseball, right? The yellow chairs, the blue chairs, the smell, the look, the lights, the scoreboard, and so it was kind of a thrill. And I think that's what re-energized a lot of
Did
people.
people clank the seats during that
Oh,
game,
yeah, it
or were
was
they
great.
all
I
filled?
mean, the no, they were clanking, and they were pretty full, if you recall, right?
I do.
50,000
Vladimir
for
Guerrero may have hit a walk-off in one of those games.
he did, junior, yeah, and it was amazing. Um, but the Big O, it was our stadium, but when I see stuff like this, and of course I don't live in Montreal anymore, it depresses me because often when I come home to Montreal, I do feel like the city hasn't evolved. Like you look at Toronto and what Toronto has done as a city in the last 20, 30 years, like Toronto feels like an American city. It's a gem. And I feel like sometimes with the politics in Montreal, with the language issues, and it stops them from evolving. And so this is just a classic example of like, oh yeah, we have this thing, let's just pour money into it, as opposed to thinking big and trying to evolve. And I will say, and this is an admission of my evolution as a person and my maturity, and learning more and reading more as opposed to being the crazed fan who foams at the mouth. There was once a time where I would definitively say, and I don't just say this to you, where I blamed everything on you, on Jeffrey Loria, on Bud Selig. I do not feel the same. I definitely do blame you guys. I'm not going to lie about that, but I definitely blame the local businessmen as much as you guys. To me, it's a 50-50, 60-40. There are a lot of rich people in Montreal who claim to be sports fans who never stepped up. The
You
Jean Coutu,
claim you talk about Toronto. The biggest difference between Toronto and Montreal, look at the owner of the Blue Jays.
yeah.
If there had been a big corporate owner, and there are a lot of big corporations, there are a lot of powerful people, and they were all partners with Bronfman, with Brochu,
Oh
a
yeah.
lot of the big companies, and all they had to do was buy the team, and it was not for a lot of money. might I add.
Compared to now, no way.
And the investment banker at the time, the late Jacques Menard, said, it's a terrible business deal to value the Expos at $150 million, let's say. And I get it, because who would have thought? But a Montreal franchise today in a new stadium, it'd be worth billions of dollars.
Sure.
And these big corporations, the way Rogers supports the Blue Jays, the renovations they've done to the Sky Dome, everything they've done, Montreal was right there. Baseball didn't want Montreal to fail. It was a personal thing with Bud and Charles that he didn't want it to fail, and Charles didn't want it to fail, but they couldn't find anyone to spend money. It was the craziest thing. As a matter of fact, they had a contract, Ariel, and this will drive you crazy.
Oh, no.
Bonuses for people were based on the team breaking even, not on the team doing well on the field. And so decisions were made by executives, Claude Brochu being one of them, to make the team financially secure. And the way to do that was by lowering payroll.
Yeah, I mean, the fire sales, 94 to 95 was heartbreaking. I Yeah, I always used to think maybe Bell, Bell to Rogers, maybe Bell would come in and, you'd get 162 games on TSN. If the Blue Jays are on Rogers, then the Expos could be Bell's thing on TSN as they expand. I always held that hope for them. But now, I don't know. There was a time where I thought, okay, it could be a real thing, but there's just too many markets now that I think are ahead of them. I do like to point out that I think Washington had 3 cracks at it, right? As a market, this being their 3rd crack
And
at
there was
it.
a big break in between.
There was, and maybe I'll be alive to see it. And as you probably know, the Expos were a AAA affiliate, and that team left the Royals, and then eventually the Expos came back. Or I should say, Montreal had a AAA affiliate named the Royals, AAA for the
Jackie
Brooklyn
Robinson.
Dodgers. Yeah, and they were very successful. Delormier Downs is where they used to play. I love all this, and it annoys me when people say that Montreal isn't a baseball town. It is a baseball town with a very rich history. It's just, to your point, the local businesses and that stadium. Unfortunately, the 1976 Olympics was kind of the beginning of the end of the Expos in many respects, because it built
Supposed to be the beginning of the beginning.
Right.
Ironically, I want to switch gears a little bit to talk about you and what an interesting. It's funny. It's such a big business. I can't call it a niche anymore, because MMA. We would. I'll tell you a funny thing about baseball and MMA. In the beginning of my career, it was not even part of the conversation. The UFC, Dana White, MMA. We viewed it not even as a blip, not as a competitor, and we watched it get bigger and bigger. And all of a sudden, it would come up in meetings. What are they doing? How are they promoting this? How is the sport growing its revenues? And that was very telling. You got in when you're telling me the story of there being nobody covering it. Do you feel like everybody is now sort of encroaching on your territory? How
No.
have you kept your voice? And it's loud and it's amazingly smart. But one of the things I was hoping you'd talk about is, since you started, the different landscape surrounding MMA.
When I first decided, when I was telling my parents about this sport called mixed martial arts, which had just become mixed martial arts, the UFC's first event was in 1993, November 12th, 1993 in Denver. And, initially they would put on maybe 2 or 3 events max a year. And then it grew to like 6 events. And then it grew to, maybe 10 events. And now they're on almost every weekend. It's about 43 or so. So it's a year-round sport with no off season. And initially, when you're a fan of the sport, it's, in the early days, it was called NHB. It wasn't even called MMA, no holds barred fighting. Um, it wasn't available in most states. For the longest time, it was just kind of like Florida, New Jersey, and, the odd like Alabama or Louisiana. And then they started to get it, legalized in all over the country, North America, etc. And as far as coverage was concerned, like, you couldn't go on SportsCenter and get the results from last night. You couldn't go to your local paper or local newscast. It was really just message boards online. To me, it's the first sport that was born in the internet age. And so I would go on message boards and you'd see other fans talking about it, but there was no real like solid coverage of it. And so that's why I thought that there was a chance to be something and to be someone. And then, of course, now, like, all we ever wanted as a community, as a fan base, was to be covered like boxing and then covered like the other major sports. And now you see MMA, at least to the younger demographic here in the United States, is way more popular than boxing. And I would argue at times it's way more popular than the NHL, than Major League Baseball. And it's crazy to me when I started, I really went full bore into all of this in 07. And I'm not sure if I told you this story, but it's kind of funny. When I graduated from Syracuse in 04, I went down a path of working in TV production. So I worked for HBO Sports. I worked on a show for ESPN Classic called Classic Now as a researcher, and I was kind of just doing production. I end up at Spike TV, which at the time was the home of the UFC. And I thought, all right, this is the place for me. This is where I'm going to kind of, I get to do production and I get to work on MMA, which I adored, but was more as a fan. I was there for 1 week and I realized that they actually didn't do anything because the UFC produce all their content. The network doesn't produce it. It's very different than MLB, NBA, where the network produces the content. UFC does everything in-house. That's how they can control the message, and it's very like pro wrestling in that regard. And so I actually went to my boss's office a week after getting hired, and I told him this was a mistake and I'd like to leave. He was very upset, but I'm the type of person that if I don't feel it, I need to go. And so I knew it was the right call. So they made me stick around for a month and a half until they found someone to replace me. My job was a production coordinator. I wasn't very important. And so I started my website and I said, all right, this is the crossroads of my life. I'm going to give myself 6 months to get notice. And every
How
morning,
old were you?
27, I'm
Wow.
2007, I'm 25.
That's early for a crossroads.
This is the cross. I was very dramatic. And I said, okay, I'm going to give myself 6 months to get noticed. Every morning, I'm going to post an interview with a fighter because I love interviewing people. And I'm going to show the world that I can interview fighters better than anyone doing it right now. And I couldn't think of what the website should be called, and podcasts weren't a thing. I had like a little WordPress plugin where you clicked on it and you can listen to the interview off your computer. And so I was thinking, what's a cool name? And I'm on this website where I'm searching like URLs to see if they're available. And for some reason, I check out if Jarry Park is available, Jarry Park being the original home of the Montreal Expos. And it was available. And Jarry Park is still around. It's a municipal park. They have tennis there. They have the Canadian Open is there. And JarryPark.com was available. And so I bought JarryPark.com. It's still up. And I rechristened it the Coliseum of Combat Sports. And I wrote this whole thing about how my favorite team left. And now I'm going to resurrect the stadium, and this will be the home of combat interviews. And with 3 days left on my deadline, March 28, 2008. So I was gonna go up to April 1st, 2008. A guy who worked for the Wasserman Media Group reached out to me and saw my website and said, "We saw your interviews, and we are starting an MMA page. Would you like to work on it? And you'll appreciate this as a businessman." I said, sure, that would be great. I thought it was done. I thought I was going to have to go back to production. He said, how much do you want to get paid? And I took the number that I was getting paid at Spike, $35,000 a year, and I doubled it, 70. And he said, yes. And he said, cool, we're in.
You said, damn it, I should have said 100.
1,000,000%. But that's how it all began. And that's really like where my journey started. I've been to a million different places since then. But then, 07, 08, 09, around mid, teens, now ESPN is in the business. And once ESPN is involved, it's on .com, it's on SportsCenter. We would have never imagined being on ABC, being on Fox, being on CBS. Like, this was like the barroom brawl sport. And so to see how far it's come now, and to the point, and I don't know if you have kids around this age, but like my nephews and cousins who are 15, 16, 14, all they want to talk to me about is MMA. They go to movie theaters to watch it. When I was starting, no one wanted to talk to me about it. My friends, it's just crazy how big the sport has come.
It's become more mainstream, except for, I would say that the structure is not mainstream. And that's something that has interested me. You talk about Dana and the power that he has. People think commissioners have power. They really don't. It's funny that people think that, but it is within the hands of the franchise owners. And one of the things that I wonder is, it's obviously gone through so many corporate structure changes, et cetera. But it is strange, I've thought, that the power is so consolidated within him and that he loves that. And he is open about that. And that is counterintuitive to normally what people in Wall Street would consider growth.
Well, okay. So first of all, it is important to note that he isn't a commissioner, right? He's more owner than commissioner, right? So,
He's
so
the only, isn't he the only owner?
well, right now, as far as like, are they the only game in town or the only owner of the UFC?
UFC. I
Well,
mean, they
no, it's
sold, so he's partners.
he's actually
True.
less of an owner now.
That's true. He's
Endeavor.
actually been diluted.
Oh yeah, in a major way, but he still makes a boatload of money. In It was originally owned by a guy named Bob Meyerowitz, Semaphore Entertainment Group. They were the original founders and owners of the UFC, and then they lost all their money. And then come 2000, Dana White is a quasi manager slash like boxer size instructor, kind of helps out some fighters locally in Las Vegas, and he catches wind of the fact that this thing is pretty much dead and these guys want to offload it. He happens to be friends with two guys who are extremely wealthy and very powerful in the Las Vegas region, the Fertitta brothers. They own the Station Casinos. Their father started them and all that. And he says like we could get the UFC for like $2 million, and this is 2000. And so they buy it. And as the story goes, for the first 4 years, they lose $44 million, but then they start this reality show called The Ultimate Fighter, and it changes their fortunes. And Dana, because he was such a big boxing fan, understood the fight game wonderfully and understood that the fragmentation of the sport of boxing, from the promoters to the sanctioning committees and all that stuff, was part of the problem. There were too many belts. There was the WBO and the WBC, and no one knows who's champion. And so he's like, if we can make this a lot more like pro wrestling, where there's just one dominant organization, like WWE is in pro wrestling, we can have tremendous success. And so everything they did was, gearing towards, we're going to be the main company, the top dog, and you're going to be exclusive to us, and it's going to be very hard for you to leave, and we're going to be, we're going to treat it's wild because like in many respects they always like to say that the fighters are contractors, right? Like contractors, like 1099
Independent
employees. Yeah,
contractors.
yeah. And I just had a guy, I have a electrical problem outside my house. I just called up a company and they changed an outlet. And now that guy is going to, go to a different job. Like he's done with me, right? I paid him for his work. He's done with me. That's what an independent contractor is. Um, Fighters can't do that. These fighters are told what to wear. These fighters are told where to be. They have to check in on an app 24/7, 365 for drug testing. These fighters can't go fight for anyone else. They're the complete opposite of an independent contractor. They're very much an employee, but they don't get treated like employees. They don't get paid like employees. They don't get the benefits of employees. But because they are so powerful and so successful, the fighters just don't have the flexibility and they don't have the power to collectively bargain and to have the rights that other pro
Well,
athletes
they
have.
could have that power.
People have tried. Trust me, people have
I
tried.
bet Harry Marino would work for them and try to get them unionized. He's the one who unionized the minor league players. But one of the things that's strange about them not and their pay, I fans complain all the time. They talk about players' salaries and everything gets publicized. You don't get a lot of talk of MMA fans about outrage over player comp,
You want to know
unless
why?
I just miss it.
No, you want to know why? Because MMA, it's such a great point, and it frustrates me sometimes when I see the big bad media personalities who are very vocal about a lot of things on different networks, and then when it comes to MMA and it comes to the UFC, and it's all about bro hugs and it's all love, and all of a sudden those hard hitting questions fly out the window, and it's because MMA and to a larger degree the fight game, this is the fun thing. This is the vice. This is the thing that you do on a Saturday night with your friends. You go to Vegas or you're home and you've got your parlay and you've got your beer and you've got your wings. We don't apply the same restrictions and the same regulations that we like to apply on the other sports as fans and as media to MMA. This is the thing that we do when we want to let our hair down and just have a grand old fight party and everyone comes over. Like when I talk about it, there are obviously some fans that appreciate it, but there's others that are just like, enough already. Stop
Mhm.
talking about this. We just want to enjoy this. Stop talking about fighter pay. Stop talking about unionization. Stop talking about the competition. Like, can you just let us enjoy this thing? And I see that with the media when they're covering things that Dana White has done, things that the UFC is doing or isn't doing. They're not holding him to the same standard, or they're not holding the organization to the same
Let's go
standard.
deeper on that though. Why?
Sure.
What would I'm trying to think of
They want to
how
be
someone
buddies.
curries that much favor. It's almost Trump-like.
Oh,
where
I mean,
there's a section of the
have you been
media.
watching UFC events lately?
So Trump just got that standing ovation. What was he in New Jersey somewhere?
This is a
And
monthly occurrence now. This is a monthly occurrence. UFC pay-per-views with 3 minutes or so. It's always at around 9:57, 9:58. The main card starts at 10 Eastern.
Mhm.
At around 9:57, 9:58 is when the prelims are wrapping up, and they're usually on either ESPN, ESPN Plus, or ABC, depending on the scope and the scale of the card. And they'll always cut at the very end, right before they go to pay-per-view. And sometimes they're on network television, and often it's on cable television. And it's Dana White and Donald Trump and whomever is with them. Sometimes it's Tucker Carlson, sometimes it's Donald Jr. walking, sometimes it's Kid Rock walking out to American Badass
That's
down
quite the
the
lineup.
the thing like they're fighters, and everyone's high-fiving, and it just becomes like a mini political rally.
Rally?
Oh yeah, and the
How do you feel about that?
well, it's crazy because I said for the last one, like the broadcasters who I consider friends, like Daniel Cormier, who's their analyst, is like if I had a wedding now, he'd be in my wedding party. I said to him, and I said on air, he stopped short at breaking out the telestrator and breaking down like Trump's strut. Like they were like fawning over the walk. It was wild. And then what happens is throughout the rest of the card, during fights, they'll be like, "Oh, look who's here! This celebrity, this fighter, that athlete." And they'll do this like 4 or 5 times throughout the 3-hour broadcast. And it always ends with Trump. He has shown multiple, it's like this guy, this guy, this guy, and the 45th president of the United States, this guy, this guy, this guy. And it's a lot. It's a
I
lot.
see a through line though, because you've got that. You've got, I would say MMA, I would say Dana may have taken the lead in what I call, and we can argue the point, but what I call sports washing, and what you may very well call too, making it normal and fine to do business, and using the pandemic as sort of the, I would say, the launching pad to having these events there. Do you see like a culture change that's happened since 2016 that you think has an impact not just on the electorate but basically on all of sports and ourselves?
Yes, in July of 2016, 2 weeks after the UFC sold to Endeavor, Dana spoke on behalf of Donald Trump at the Republican National Convention in Cleveland. Um, and Dana, and I hope that your audience understands, because every time I talk about this stuff, I talk about it with Pablo and I talk about it on my show. People think that I'm complaining by talking about it. I'm just talking about it. I just want to let
That's
you
what
know,
we
like,
do on Nothing Personal. We give everyone a chance to make their own decision. We just
yes,
like to give both sides of every story.
I'm not in a corner. Like they say, look at this snowflake. I couldn't care less. I don't even reference it. Some of my colleagues get all up in arms, and I think it's more funny than anything. In any event, he when he showed up there, Dana White was always the guy who said, "We don't talk about politics here. We don't talk about religion here. We don't talk about your family. Like, we are the fight company." In fact, he would always say, "I got people in my company who come to me and say like, oh, we need to do this for merchandise. We need to do this for the DVDs. We need to do this and that for marketing." And he would always say, "I make fights. Don't talk to me about this." And now, 2016, he shows up on behalf of his friend Donald Trump. And I say friend, and that's legit. Donald Trump was one of the first businessmen to really open his doors to the UFC in the early 2000s. The Trump Taj Mahal would host multiple UFC events. So he was always very good and loyal to the UFC. And in turn, Dana, a very loyal guy to people who he considers friends and business partners, is returning the favor. But let's be honest, like they're both helping each other out, right? And
Is
it
Dana
just,
loyal? Sorry, you view him. You just said an interesting thing, because I don't view Trump for good or for bad. We're not talking politics here, but loyalty is interesting. I just view it as they mutually depend on each other to use each other to benefit themselves.
it's a very good point. Dana preaches loyalty, and I do believe to certain people he is loyal. I know this for a fact for myself. And again, I'm just talking about personal experience, not
Right.
crying about it. Uh, Lorenzo wasn't a big fan of mine because Lorenzo is one of the smartest businessmen that I've ever come across. And he would listen to my show and he would read stuff that I would write. And he didn't like the fact that I would talk about the business of MMA. Everything was just very surface level. So he was like, why is this guy who
You were
he's
ahead of
he's
your
supposed,
time.
yeah, like, why is he talking about collective bargaining? I'm a big sports fan, so I know these things exist. Why is he talking about revenue sharing? Why is he comparing the fact that, you know, we get 150 million from Fox and the fighters get $0, but the NBA players get 50% of their TV deal. Like, so he would then tell Dana that I wasn't loyal, and that ruined my relationship with Dana. And so because Lorenzo said this guy's bad, then Dana obviously is more loyal to Lorenzo than he is to me, of course. That's the loyalty that I'm talking about. So there's obviously different levels of loyalty, but I think that if you're in his circle, if you're part of like the close knit crew, he's the type of guy, and he certainly says he is, and I believe him to a degree, that would take a bullet for a friend, would back his friend until the end of time. If you're just a transactional relationship, like I sort of was, then those people can come and go. So I do think he is loyal to Trump, but let's be honest, being friends with the president of the United States is a pretty damn good position to be if you're a fight promoter. You're on his plane, he's sitting front row at your events. This is all very good. And now for this, this election year, we're not seeing Trump campaign in many places consistently other than UFC events. It's a monthly occurrence that he shows up almost every pay-per-view to do this entrance, and the fighters are jumping over the cage and shaking his hand. And now if you're a fan, you're like, oh damn, my favorite fighter is that excited to see Trump. Like this is all beautiful
Then
stuff.
I must be too.
Yeah, exactly. And you know what's amazing about it? I see a lot of people call ESPN, my former employer, woke, right? They're often accused of being woke, but yeah, this is happening on ESPN air. You know what I mean? And no one seems to. So we're still kind of that niche thing on the side, because could you imagine if Biden was being trotted out at NBA games? People would lose their minds, good or bad. Again, people just give the UFC a pass because it's the fun Saturday night thing. It's the fight world. It's crazy. It's a
You
circus.
just got me thinking about this year's election. Not that I haven't been thinking about it, but the amount of money that people spend on campaigns, I'm not sure you need to spend all that much anymore, because you end up preaching to the choir because everyone has already made up their mind. So maybe you're going after the undecided, but I haven't been able to find too many people who are undecided anymore. They may poll that way or say that, but I found it fascinating. So Trump is using the UFC as a campaign stop
1,000%.
brilliantly,
It's
because
brilliant.
the total expense is zero. It's his transportation, which it wouldn't shock me if Dana would cover as a contribution, because it's such a benefit on every side.
So there's a gentleman named Stephen Chung, who I just looked him up quickly because I don't want to mess it up, and I'm just looking this up on Wikipedia. But he is being listed as political advisor for Donald Trump and campaign spokesman 2023, 2024. He used to work for the UFC. And so this is all, he's talked openly about this. This is beneficial to the UFC. It's beneficial to Donald Trump. And what's amazing to it is, I mean, what's the demo? What's the key demo for UFC? It's 18 to 34-year-old
18
males.
to 34.
Like, what's
Is it
better than
white
that?
males?
What's better than that? It's like, it's a dream scenario for him. And so trust me, there is a part of me, there are some people who I see very vocal about, and this is a whole other conversation, but I think you'll know what I'm trying to get at. They're very vocal about Saudi Arabia getting very much involved in not only sports, but fight sports in particular. They are very into boxing, and now they're actually going to have their first UFC event in 11 days from when we're recording this. They talk about sport washing, they talk about ethics and all this stuff, but they don't, like, this is a form of it. This is a form. What is happening in America with Donald Trump is a form of sport washing as well. Like 3 days after he's indicted on these 34 counts, he's sitting front row. And again, I am not offended. I just want everyone to know I'm good. It doesn't bother me, but we have to call it like we see it. And typically the UFC has always been the place where it's like no politics allowed. And by the way, to the credit of WWE and their current leadership team, and I will be the first to say, Nick Khan, who is their CEO, used to be my agent. They have never gone down this road, right? They have never gone down this road since Trump became president. I know Linda McMahon was a part of his team and whatnot, but they could have easily tried to like do this as well. And for whatever reason, they decided not to. I think it's interesting that one entity under this TKO group umbrella, this new, conglomerate, chooses to do it so overtly and the other entity doesn't.
Well, that you can keep it bifurcated that way. You can pretend that it's separate.
Sure.
Like the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's
Yeah.
doing, but obviously there's a strategy. I wonder which hand came up with Jake Paul against Mike Tyson. And I'm wondering, as I saw that is going to be rescheduled for November, does that sort of match? Does it bother you as a true fighting connoisseur? Do you find it to be a joke or what is your, or are you just happy Netflix is in the game of bidding for stuff?
So I mean, that last point is a huge point, right? Because the first thing that we heard about Netflix was they're getting into the WWE business come January 1st, which is gigantic. The money is gigantic. And then it leads me to think like, wait a second, the UFC deal's up at the end of 25. Are they going to go to Netflix? And that would be huge for the sport, et cetera, et
They're a
cetera.
bidder.
1,000%. I will be very honest with you. When I was first told about this by the people putting on the fight, I was pretty shocked because what I had been hearing for quite some time was that Jake wants to be taken seriously as a pro boxer. And his last few fights were against unknown boxers who are the type of fighters that someone with his record would fight, right? Like if you look at Canelo Alvarez's record, if you look at Floyd Mayweather's record, Tyson Fury, all these people, they're fighting no-namers when they're 7-1, 8-1, 9-0, 10-0. That's what you do when you're a boxer up until you get to like the 20s and 30s. And so he was doing that. I was like, you know what? Credit to him. These aren't the sexiest names. They're not big names at all, but he's clearly saying that he wants to win a world championship, and these are the steps you need to take. And then all of a sudden he has two of those fights and it's like left turn, and it's a 57-year-old, soon to be 58-year-old Mike Tyson. And so I will be 1,000%. I have mixed feelings about it because I don't
Money's
think
good.
Oh, it's gigantic. I'll be honest. I was supposed to work that card on July 20th. I was supposed to be a commentator for it. I was supposed to be the in-ring interviewer, and that's a huge opportunity for me as someone who is trying to grow in this fight game and in this TV game and all that stuff. Once they started to fill out the rest of the card, I started to feel a lot better about it because the co-main event, which is the second to last fight, is a legit boxing fight. It's between the two, arguably two of the best females in the world who had an incredible like classic at MSG. They're just like legit boxers. There's no gimmick to them. They're not influencers. It's Katie Taylor, Amanda Serrano. And so to me, like that's a fight that I would pay $70 just to watch them. They would never be a co-main other than for a fight like this. So I was like, okay, if you don't like the main event, at least you can feel comfortable with the co-main. Like this is legit boxing. I'll tell you what, since I've started doing this job, I've never had more parents at my kids' school, kids at the soccer, field, people around my neighborhood be like, so who's going to win the fight? And I know what they're going to ask. I know what they're thinking about, but I just want to make sure. I'm like, which fight are you talking about? There's a Conor McGregor fight coming up in a couple of weeks. There's this fight. Oh, Jake Paul, Mike Tyson. I have never had so many moms, so many dads, so many siblings. Are you working the Jake Paul, Mike Tyson? So there's something there. I just,
Are you doing in-ring in November?
So now that there's a new date, it's not a done deal, but
it's not done. I hope you get it because
I would assume. Yeah.
Because here's the thing about that. When you are marketing something and you're trying to make money, I don't think that the promoters, Jake Paul, are as concerned about your analysis of the benefit of such a matchup versus the reality that they're getting into a whole new demographic. The soccer moms are interested
They are.
in a overcard. That's it. That means they've won.
It blew me away. It really blew me away. And I got to host one leg of their 2-city press conference tour. It was at Apollo Theater in Harlem. And for the following week, people are like, I saw you on TikTok. Wait, like there are parents on my kids' soccer team that I've known for years now, 3-4 years. We've never talked about work. We're always talking about soccer. And they're like, wait a second. What were you doing up there? What do you do for, actually, I Googled you. Oh my God, I didn't realize. And so that just shows that it just kind of opened up to a whole new demographic. And this is why
it's
Netflix
hard to
wants
resist that. It's
Yeah.
hard to resist when you're putting things together. When you're Jake Paul and this comes in front of you, he's less interested that you may be concerned of the quality of his opponent. It becomes truly secondary.
And you have the older fans, like say people of our generation who would say, oh man, Mike's gonna kill him. Like, I mean, we grew up on Punch Out and him, biting people's ears off and stuff like that. And then you have the newer fans who are in their 14s, 15s, 16s, and they're like, oh, Jake's gonna kill him. And so then you have the older fans who are like, oh man, Mike cannot get knocked out by Jake Paul. The Disney kid is gonna knock out Iron Mike, no chance. And so it becomes like a classic barbershop fight. I took my kids to get haircuts last week, and this was before it got canceled. And the barbers were coming up to me. They're like, come on, Iron Mike ain't going to get knocked out by Jake Paul. And this is what they want.
It's not the Iron Mike they know. let's face it, he's 50. He's older than I am, for Christ's
Yeah,
sake.
but he's in great
Which
shape. Have you seen him without a shirt? He looks
I
fantastic.
just don't know if I can believe anything I see. But yes, it appears that he looks good. Listen, I've taken up enough of your time. I
No,
am
no, this is
truly
great.
appreciative. We could keep going. I
We
had
could
so
do a
many more
show.
things about Montreal that I wanted to talk about with you.
What's one
And
more? What's one more?
we can no, we're totally out of
We're
time.
out of
We're
time.
on the clock. It's a
Uh,
hard out.
oh, it's a hard.
Hey,
You do a
I
hard out.
appreciate
This
this
is
is
the
it.
internet. The
We're doing it
internet.
right now.
Oh my God. Okay.
It's
Goodbye.
just business. Thanks, Ariel. This is nothing personal.